Our next speaker, Irene Pepperberg, is a research associate and lecturer at Harvard and an adjunct professor at Brandeis. She is a fellow of AAAS, the American Psychological Association, the American Psychological Society, the American Ornithologists Union. She is the winner of the John Simon and Harry Frank Guggenheim Awards, the Selby Fellowship from the Australian Academy of Sciences, and she's also a Radcliffe Fellow. She's the author of the Alex Studies and the New York Times bestseller Alex and Me, which is about her relationship with quite a prolific parrot, so prolific that he became the only parrot in history ever to have his obituary in The Economist. So, please welcome Irene Pepperberg to the stage.
There we go. Okay. And this is a now for something completely different. Okay. A brief history of our relationship with animals. We, thinking back to the Stone Age, there were dangerous predators and prey. I mean, we were basically more likely to be their lunch than the opposite. We also can think of them as, we domesticated them so we can eat them. We have looked at them as assistants, so we've trained them and we've domesticated them for herding and for things like that. We've, also considered them as chattel, as beasts of burden, to do all of our work for us. Essentially drudgery, plowing, things like that. We also look at animals as competitors. I mean, you think about the amount of food that we lose to rats and mice and things like that in our storerooms. And again, and if you look at, there are still people who are upset about animals like, wolves and bears and stuff for eating cattle and fish and things like that that we want. We've also used animals as metaphors or icons. There's the wise old owl. There's the evil snake. We've used them as objects of religious reverence in many, many societies and in many different ways. And these are just a few, little pictures of things. If you look at the American Indians, they actually, part of their religion was shape-shifting to try to absorb the types of behaviors of these animals to improve their abilities and things like that. So we have a very complex type of relationship with them. We have made these animal-like robots that we've talked about. And these are creatures, we've heard about this. They have some learning component. And when I was at the Media Lab, we interviewed people, and we found that there were people who felt guilty when they were turning them off, okay, because they felt like they were somehow, killing them, in these types of things. And for some people, they wanted these instead of a real dog because they didn't have to walk it or feed it or worry about it when they went on vacation. But we can look at animals, at these animal-like robots merely as simply drudges. And I mean, there are things like this that are coming out, and I don't know that we're trying to do this to take care of the bee crisis for pollination, but you could see, where that would start to come. And there were other, and we've created other things, and even Kismet, which does not look at all human. I mean, I met Kismet, and when I said goodbye and the ears went down and the mouth started to droop and the eyes started to droop, there was this immediate bong of sadness. So these creatures trigger something in us, even if they don't look like us, even if they don't look like animals that we are with. We have odd ways of treating animals, even in children's fantasy. So, I mean, why is one humanoid and the other not? This one always bothered me quite a bit. So to sum this up in a little bit, you look at Descartes, animals were mindless brutes. Darwin, there are evolutionary predecessors. I mean, we all know that. Romanes, this was one of Darwin's disciples. If you read his stuff, you get the feeling that he looked at animals as simply humans in fur and feathers. B.F. Skinner had a totally different view. I mean, his idea was whether it was human or an animal, a rat, a mouse, a pigeon, we were all basically mindless creatures that simply responded to stimuli in certain very predictable ways. So there was no question that animals were like us, but in a very different way than Romanes did, who thought of us thought of us all as thinking creatures. Don Griffin, who's amazing, first known for his bat sonar studies, but later became the father of animal consciousness, and basically was arguing in very strong ways that animals, many animals, were conscious, and they were conscious processors of information. And if you look at people like Stephen Wise, I mean, he's arguing that, you know, animals are deserving of full legal rights because they're sentient beings. So again, we have these very strange positive negative relationships with animals. I mean, we have the horrors of the Michael Vick you know, problems, and then we go to the extremes of, you know, Paris Hilton, who's, you know, carrying her little doggy around with her all the time. As Americans, we spend $46 billion per year on our pets, and this is, I think this number is a year or two old. So, but you get the idea that this is not a small thing. So I just wanted to sort of give you some background before I get to the real issues that I think that we as Summit people should be interested in. And those involving engineering and the implications. And the ideas of, you know, the ideas that we could selectively breed animals in certain ways, but the problems that might arise. One of my big issues is that we as yet do not quite understand how intelligent animals really are. And I'm going to show you today some little bits of animal intelligence, and these are just bits. And what are the legal ramifications? I mean, this Carl Sagan quote really struck me. I mean, you know, how smart does a chimpanzee have to be before killing it constitutes murder? So, you know, this is one of the things we have to think about if we're thinking about making animals even smarter through some kind of selective breeding or engineering or whatever. So let me start just with selective breeding, very little short. I just want to tap on this slightly. But, you know, we have done this type of thing. There are those of you who may be familiar with the study of breeding the foxes for, in Russia to be more friendly to people. And then they got ones that were getting more and more dog-like and more childlike and things like that. So there are these interesting consequences. I mean, when we breed thoroughbred horses, we now have creatures that, you know, they try to run a race and their bones break as they run. They get bleeding from the lungs. It's very hard to breed them now because there's low fertility. The hearts are messed up. The hoof-body ratio, everything is messed up because we have tried to breed in a certain way. Dogs, we have all these standard breeds. I mean, it's not just the idea of breeding some, you know, mutt because he was kind of good at, you know, chasing down the, you know, whatever it was he was helping you chase down. And if he wasn't good at that, he ended up in the stew pot. This is, you know, selective breeding because we like them to have pointy, you know, pointy faces or special ears or something. And we end up with dogs with epilepsy, with hip dysplasia. We end up with dogs that have, you know, their skulls are too small for their brains. Dogs that have to be delivered by cesarean section because of the way, you know, they just can't do it normally anymore. I mean, these are really weird things that we have done. We get cats. The same thing, there are show cats. It's not as famous as the Westminster Dog Show, but they're show cats. They have, you know, hernias, they have heart murmurs, they've got kidney diseases, and this is all because we are trying to improve the breed. So unintended consequences. And, you know, what other ones will we cause if we start messing around with things that we really don't understand yet? And intelligence, okay, I could give you, well, I do. I give an entire course at Harvard on animal intelligence, and even there we just barely, you know, tick the important things. So today I'm just going to show you a few little things about avian intelligence, which is what I'm familiar with. And this is Betty the Crow. Okay, the original study was to see if she would pick hooks versus straight things to get the little treat at the bottom there. And the male stole all of the hooks. So she's left just with the straight pieces of wire. And she's obviously having a tough time of it. So watch what she does. Never been trained to do this. Okay? And there she goes. Okay, my parrot Alex. This is a little piece.
On the tray, how many orange wool?
We need a little bit more video.
Very good boy. Okay, we'll
So
get
he
you that
identified
nut.
3 blocks out of this mess of blocks, of colored
There you
blocks.
go.
I asked him,
Can you tell me how many orange block? How many orange block
Now,
How many orange blocks?
he's getting upset because
many
he only
orange
usually
block?
gets one question per tray.
Very good. Okay, last question. How many green block?
Now, I mean,
How
that
many
head
green
thing,
block?
he is really, he's not even looking at
Good
the tray.
boy, how many
He's so
green
annoyed
block?
at me because I'm breaking our
Yeah,
agreement.
how many green block? How many green block? Good boy, how many green block? Now, how many green block? 4. Good boy. Good parrot.
Okay, so that's production.
Okay.
So now there's green and you know, there's a whole mixture of blocks, and he was able to pick out the ones that I was specifically asking him about. So there were green and orange
what's here?
blocks and balls.
That's right. Say.
And I'm not going to do this one because we don't have time. We did some work on phonetics. So the idea behind this was that I was teaching him to sound out bits of sound like you do with children with their phonetics. So the question would be, you know, what color B? And he'd go gray. Or what sound? Green. And he'd go t. And that was the way we were testing, because we wanted to see if he understood that his words were made up of individual units of sound. And this was just the beginnings. So we're at the Media Lab during the sponsor week. Those of you who know the Media Lab, whole bunches of people come through who have given us lots and lots of money. They want to see what we've done with it, and they wanted to see this task that Alex did. And they're only with you for 5 minutes or most, 5, maybe 6 minutes. And so Alex, I asked him a question, he was right, and he wanted a nut, and I didn't want to spend the time having him chew nuts while these people were here. So I said, just wait, and I asked him another question. And he goes, want a nut? And I go, wait. So we ask him another question. He gives me the right answer. He's going, want nut? I go, Alex, come on, one more question. And he answers it right, and he says, want a nut? And I say, wait, and he goes, no, want nut, n-t. So, not only is he sort of saying, hey, dummy, do I have to spell it for you, but n and t were trained. Was never trained. And this bird figured out, he had jumped ahead of us and figured out how to sound out his label, something we had not yet taught him. We were also doing more work on number concepts. As I showed you the production, this was comprehension. So it was a similar type of task. The question was, what would be something like, what color 6? And he'd have to find the 6 things on there and tell me the color. Okay, you can do it, but it takes you, a couple of seconds to see it and get it. And he did the first 10 trials or so perfectly nicely, 95%, really great, but then he gets bored. And he starts taking his beak and throwing everything on the floor. Or he turns his back to me and starts preening. Or the best one was he'd look at a tray like this, and I'd say, what color 6? And he'd go, orange, gray, purple. Because those were all the colors that were not on the tray. And he wanted to make it clear he wasn't just making a mistake. He was not wanting to do this. So I come in one day, and there were 3, 4, and 6 things on the tray. And I say, Alex, what color 3? And he looks at me and goes, 5. I'm going, Alex, what color 3? Because there's no 5 things on the tray. And he's going 5. And we're going back and forth a couple of times. And I'm thinking, so who's the PhD? And who's, what's going on here? And I finally go, okay, Smarty, what color 5? And he looks at me and he goes, none. Now, he had learned none with respect to absence of same and different, absence of information about 2 objects. I could show him 2 objects and say, what's same and what's different? He'd say color, shape, matter, or none. But here he had taken none from that and transferred it to absence of stuff, a zero-like concept. We didn't have that till the 1600s, okay, in the West. And furthermore, he had figured out how to manipulate me into asking him the question he wanted to answer. Okay, so this is, this was getting kind of freaky. Brooks, another very interesting corvid. This was not tested before, not trained before this was tested. And they just give the animal a choice of stones. And it takes a look at what's going on. And it gets a little mealworm. So this sounds, pretty good. Okay, you just pick up stone and dump it. All right, but now look at what happens. So there's a tiny little tube there. And the rook knows to pick the tiny little stone. And the same type of thing again. And these are untrained behaviors. This is out of Clayton's lab at Cambridge. And these are just the tip of studies of what we know. I mean, there's so much more stuff. I can tell you about apes and dogs and bees and even fish that, you know, can be trained and understand concepts of 1 and 2 and versus 3 things. Yet, interestingly, in the United States right now, there is very little money going to examine animal cognition. It's not curing cancer. It's not curing AIDS. It's not helping us, quote unquote, in any way that we can really understand. So there's very, very little funding on this to continue examining animal intelligence. And so we really, again, there's this iceberg, the tip of which we've begun to explore, and now we're kind of running a little bit dry. So my question is, you know, why would we want to start trying to mess around with something before we actually know what's really there to begin with? Okay, and I think this is a very important question. You know, and the other thing is, how do we go about getting people to realize that studying animal intelligence that we already have is a good thing? I mean, I started my work on animal, quote unquote, language in 1978. And that was, you know, about 10 years after the beginning of work with the apes and the dolphins. And 1980, there was a conference in the Clever Hans phenomena, the New York Academy of Sciences, and basically looking at the things that people had done comparing children, parrots. Parrots weren't in there. I was lucky at that point because it was a witch hunt. Basically claiming that we were either faking our data or faking ourselves, that this stuff was just not, it was just, animals couldn't do this kind of stuff. And we weren't talking about having them come up and give lectures to people the way you and I are conversing. They were just talking about very simple things, comparing the animals to very young children. And the issues were, you know, not just about, I mean, it was a huge backlash, and it wasn't just because of problems with experimental designs, which there were. I mean, these people were pioneers. I came in 10 years later. I got to learn from their mistakes. There were mistakes. They were pioneers. They were testing out methods. They were trying to do a totally new science. And as Terry Sinofsky said to me, you can tell that, you know, who the pioneers were. They're the ones with the arrows in their backs. But a lot of the things that were going on had less to do with experimental design than a lot of people freaking out about this last bastion of uniqueness. I mean, we already had shown that animals were making tools and using tools and doing all these other things that were supposed to be the separations between humans, and now our language was at stake. I mean, these are really issues. Getting into sort of the ethics at this point, there are so many problems that we are beginning to face about how do we deal with these intelligent animals. I mean, right away, there are a lot of people who, you know, won't eat meat or wear parts of animals. They don't want us using animals for medical research. They have no right. They say that we have no right to take any kind of advantage of other sentient beings, to the extent of even objecting to the pets, having animals as pets. And they interestingly use the studies that were done in laboratories on animal intelligence to support their views, which, if you think about that kind of a circularity, is really, you know, kind of gets to somebody like me. There are a lot of legal and other ramifications about these things. So, I mean, if you think about, I mean, animal rights, it's a huge, huge issue. There are conferences that have, you know, more people than are here today, okay, at these conferences about animal rights. In many places in the United States, we no longer talk about pets. We talk about our companion animals, okay? People refer to themselves as their animal guardians, not as owners, okay, because these are important. So to what extent do we take this responsibility? I mean, most states have some kinds of laws to prevent really horrific, you know, animal cruelty. And that's not, you know, nobody's going to argue about things like that. But, okay, if you do animal research in a laboratory in the United States with an animal like I use, a pet animal, okay, I still have to fill out a multiple-page form every year saying how I'm not going to do anything at all terrible to this animal. And my colleagues, who all they want to do is take people out to watch birds, okay, in their ornithology class, and they still have to fill out, you know, multiple pages, because somehow putting a binocular, you know, here and looking at a bird there is going to be an issue. But that's not to say that there aren't horrible abuses. And there are laboratories that are not as friendly to the animals as mine, that my students refer to themselves as parrot slaves. So that gives you an idea about, the way my birds are treated when the students feel that they're the slaves to the birds. But, there are a lot of issues about things like caging conditions and treatment and not using appropriate anesthesias for animals during experiments. I mean, there are serious things that do go on. But the retaliation against everybody who does work on animals is really scary. And again, it's scary because it's based on the work that people like myself do, showing how intelligent these animals are in the laboratories. And, PETA logic is that we shouldn't be doing any of this animal experimentation. It's horrible. I had somebody come to my laboratory and they were absolutely horrified because my birds are in a windowless room. And I went to explain to them, well, the reason my birds are in a windowless room with a stainless steel door outside with a combination lock that we have to change every month is because one of your group broke into the animal care facility the month before I came to the university and released all the animals, which were promptly eaten by the coyotes and the hawks and things like that. So, I mean, I'm not trying to say that the PETA type people are wrong, because they are really helping against the most egregious abuses. And I'm just trying to bring out the point that there are extremists that make life really weird for everything else. And the interesting thing is that we can argue that the PETA people are extreme because we can also argue that animals are not optimally smart. But of course, that means that we're, limiting smart with respect to our human needs and our abilities, and putting ourselves at some kind of pinnacle, not realizing that animals have their own kinds of smarts in their own ways. And, if we don't know how to relate to animals now, what would happen if we started super engineering animals? All right? And again, we did some stuff at the Media Lab. There are a lot of people who like their pets better than their spouses or their kids. And so do you want to engineer these animals for improvement at this point? I mean, and what happens if we do? Let's put it bluntly. Okay, I had to leave Alex at the veterinary hospital when he was really sick. And he's sitting there and going, come here, want to go back, I love you, don't go. I mean, once you have an animal who's doing that to you as you leave him at a hospital, how do you make how do you call it an it? How do you make that kind of distinction between your animal and your, other members of your household, okay? Again, we know so little about animals. We know that some of them see more clearly than we do. They hear more clearly than we do. And we take advantage of this. I mean, during the World Trade Center, notice the guy is in hazmat gear. Think about the poor dog who's there literally wearing the pads off its paws. And is the dog got any kind of respirator, anything on him? No, the guy's in a hazmat suit. And the dog is just there sniffing things out. I mean, this is a picture of an old-fashioned, the miners' canaries. They used to take them down into the mines for gas leaks. So if the canary died, you knew you had to get out. So we already use these animals in really ways. So, how much more intelligence do we want to put in an animal when we're using it in these ways? I jokingly say, do we want a chicken and a cow that's smarter so we can just tell it to go to the barn, but we're going to eat it anyway. So we could assuage our feelings because we now have a free-ranging animal? I don't know. Or then is it harder to say that, to eat them if they can respond in these ways? Jokingly, think about training animals for spy missions, and it's not so much of a joke because there has been people have been training dolphins to search out mines, underwater mines and things like that. But what would you do with a rogue chimp or a rogue ape that you've trained to do this because you've given it a higher level of intelligence by some kind of engineering or whatever, and then it decides it doesn't want to spill the beans, until you meet better caging conditions or, something. I mean, I'm being facetious in some level, but I'm also saying that we were already using these animals in some of these ways. And then what happens if we make them more intelligent or push things. Would we then start becoming paranoid about these animals that we've made more intelligent? And how do we decide, which ones are we going to improve and which ones are we not going to improve? And who draws the lines and who draws the species of how smart do we make them and things like that? Who sets the upper limits? Think about an ape, okay? We now know that it has at least the intelligence of a 6-year-old child because we can give it the exact kind of test you give a 6-year-old child. And I'm not talking about language comprehension. I'm just talking about, concepts of bigger and smaller and same and different and number concepts and things like that. In fact, Matsuzawa's chimpanzees do better at certain number tasks than college students. Okay? So, you've got this thing. It's also, it's 100 times more strong than a child, about 10 times stronger than a, adult human at least. But it probably lacks the, emotional and moral compass that we have. Now, what if you gave it the intelligence of a human teenager? Do we have the right then to keep it captive? Do we dare let it free? And this is not peaceable kingdom. When adult chimps fight with one another, they go for each other's testicles, okay? These are, really not nice, friendly, cuddly fuzzies. You see the little chimps having, playing at the zoos on chimp tea parties, and these are the little baby chimps. But if you go to a facility where they have adult ones who, throw their toys at you, and the toys are like, big parts of tree trunks because they really don't want to be watched that day, you start getting a different feeling. What if there were some cross-intelligence genes, jokingly getting into a squirrel? How many of you have tried to outwit squirrels at your bird feeders already, with that level of intelligence? And, jokingly, what happens, next, all right? Again, and we don't yet understand non-human emotions and morality, and what their versions are compared to ours. We're just beginning to start studying this kind of stuff. And then would we find this uncanny valley that was mentioned? Would we start finding it if we start engineering these animals to be more human-like, or use them for robot models and things like that? If you want to start using animals, enhanced animals as models for robotics and things like that, and human-like machines, and making these robots more animal-like and things like that, you're starting to get to points that we have to start thinking about in terms of what's going on. And these aren't fantasies. I didn't know about the Hanson's work when I did this, but they've got, basically we're building robots to patrol different parts of our coast and things like that already. And so whether it's robotic versions or improved living creatures, the more like us that we make these non-humans with whom we share the world, the more difficult it's going to be to keep the lines between them and us, given already how difficult we are finding it to draw those lines between how we treat our pets and how we treat members of our family and things like that. Imagine an enhanced version of these animals. And then again, what happens to the discards when we make a mistake? That's something we have to think about if we're going to embark on this idea. And, then do we find ourselves in some kind of intelligence arms race with these non-humans and stuff? And what seems to be an underlying issue here is the moral code of the creatures. Whether it's human or non-human or robotic that we create. These are important things that we need to think about. And how that code, is going to affect our relationships with these creatures. And, looking at the moral code of humans, I'm not really very cheerful about how we might start dealing with these creatures. And I came upon, thinking about this, about the idea of, super intelligence creatures, I came upon this quote. It's attributed to George Bernard Shaw. And, if a group of beings from another planet were to land on Earth, beings who considered themselves to be superior to you, as you feel yourself to be to other animals, would you concede them the rights over you that you assume over other animals? So, think about that. But should we be pessimistic about it? I don't think so. But I think we need to really examine our emotions and examine our reasons for possibly getting into this field. And apropos of the George Bernard Shaw, those of you, about half of you in the audience are probably too young to remember The Twilight Zone with Rod Serling's. And there was actually, that's one of the things that happened in one of his episodes. A spaceship lands and these creatures come out and they say, hey, you primitive humans, we are here to serve man. We are going to make the deserts bloom. We are going to end disease. We are going to end warfare. And they do this. And some people are involved in cracking the code of this book to serve man that they've left with the humans. And periodically they take a bunch of humans to their planet to show them the absolute beauty of what's going on. And
Mr. Chambers!
This is the
Mr.
finale.
Chambers! Mr. Chambers! Don't get on that ship! Don't get on that ship! To serve man! The book! To serve man! It's a cookbook! It's a cookbook!
Okay, so I want to leave you with the fact that we are just beginning to start studying about non-human morality, and there's a lot of conflicting lab data on whether or not they will share, whether they respond to inequality. I mean, these are all things that are based in the laboratories, and what we do see is a real strong component of tit for tat, of a very somewhat rigorous way of engendering relationships. And the question is, would our changing their intelligence change the morality in ways that would be good or bad for us? And that's where I want to leave you thinking. Thank you very much.
How much time she got?
Okay, I've got some time for questions. Yes.
So first I wanted to make one correction for you. To Serve Man comes from Damon Knight, not from Rod Serling. He's the author who wrote the story.
Okay,
Rod
but
Serling did a TV adaptation of it. Anyway, what I wanted to ask you was, with birds, because birds have such a weight penalty in their evolution, because everything in their evolution has to maintain flight, what is it you think that, what evolutionary pressures do you think led to select for such particular intelligence in birds?
It's actually the same kind of pressures that selected for that in primates. They are long-lived creatures in complex social and ecological areas. And so they have the same problems that the apes do. Like the apes, they forage 60 kilometers a day. They have to remember over the course of their lives, what food is where, and they have to have this mental map of all the food situations and what over time, has been depleted and what not, again, and changing over long periods of their lives. The social relationships, it's the same thing. We don't know too much about dominance hierarchies in the birds. We think they exist from what we've seen in the lab, but you look at apes, and they know that if Sam beat up on Joe and Joe beat up on me, I don't even, go to see what's going on that top guy because I'm going to get creamed. But over their lives, the top guy can get deposed. Bill and Bob can get together, form an alliance, get rid of the top guy, and then everything changes. And they have to be able to update all that information and work on that. So they have to understand the transitive inference, which is tough to figure out, what not to do, and then figure out all these changes over their lives, both ecologically and socially. And the parrots, for example, are living in exactly the same areas and doing the same things as the apes. Okay. And there's actually brain areas. For those of you who don't know, avian brains have been derived from the same pallial areas as our brains, particularly the cortical areas. Birds do not have what looks like a cortex, but it acts exactly like a cortex. It's derived from the same pallial area. And those birds with the highest ratio of that cortical area to the rest of their brain, the parrots and the corvids, are the ones that are responding about the level as intelligence as the apes.
So you talked a bit about animal rights with regards to animal intelligence. And I was just wondering what you think if you created a sufficiently intelligent machine, say a robot that passed the Turing test, what the rights of such a machine should be. Should it be allowed to vote? Would turning it off be a crime? Those kinds of things.
Yeah. I mean, I think about those things a lot, and they flicker around in my head the same way as I worry about what would happen with the animals. I really haven't come to decisions about those. But I think they are things that we really have to think about as we go down that path.
So there's an expression about driving on the highway that anyone going faster than you is a maniac and anyone going slower than you is an idiot. And
you must drive 128.
and I was reminded of that a bit when you were talking about, what's okay to do to animals and what isn't, because on the one hand you criticize not giving a hazmat suit to a dog, but on the other hand you criticize PETA. And so I was wondering if you think there might be a bit of that going on with how you look at this, or if you have a theoretical framework for what's okay and what isn't.
Well, what I was trying to get at are the extremes, okay? And the fact that, I really respect a lot of what PETA does, because they are the people who are saying, hey, why do you have the hazmat suit and not the dog? But I'm saying that they then often take things to an extreme that causes undue hardship in a lot of ways. My birds, it would be great if they had sunlight, but they can't have it because of the extreme stuff. So I think there should be some middle ground there. And what I'm saying is that there's issues about the fact that we haven't found that middle ground yet.
So you asked how changing their intelligence would affect their morals, and while it
whether it would.
Whether it would. So we've got specific moral adaptations in our own brain, and I wouldn't. And even if we tried to put the genes or control networks for those into the animal along with whatever it was that was intelligence, I kind of doubt it would all integrate correctly the first time. So you claim not to have a position on this, but if I were to offer the allegation that maybe we should just steer clear of this whole area because our tools aren't good enough and it's all going to go horribly wrong, and there's not actually any tremendous overwhelming need to do it, would you then have an opinion? No, that can't possibly be the right answer. Or?
No, that's basically. I think that is some way the way I feel at this point, because we really don't yet understand the limits of intelligence or the morality or whatever in these animals. We just don't understand the system well enough to begin tinkering with it. And I think that is my position at the moment. That could change 20 years from now with more knowledge. But right at the moment, I think what we have to do is take our energies and our finances and everything in exploring what's already there.
One more question, Irene?
Okay.
Since there was a lot of interesting discussion of engineering animals, I was wondering what your opinion is of the ethics of what we're doing now, cloning farm animals for meat. And I was also curious whether you think scientists down the road should be allowed to create hybrids of human animals and other animals.
Well, I think what would be better instead of cloning animals to have more cows, I think it would be better to, using that sense to try to do artificial meat or something like that. Okay? And as far as hybrid systems, I don't think it's a good idea because we don't understand what we've got yet. And I'm not trying to be this horrible pessimistic, stuck in the everything new is bad. No. I'm trying to say that I think at the moment we need to do more in terms of exploring what we don't know before we start embarking on things that we really have no idea where we're getting. And again, I think it's a challenge to us to, when I was at the Media Lab, we were using technology to help us learn and explore more about animal intelligence. And, I had no problems with things like that. I'm not some kind of, Luddite in terms of what's going on. I'm just saying that we need to get a certain level of understanding. We don't know exactly how much of our brain is just frosting on top of a chimp brain. That's something we really need to study more about. We know that pigeons, for example, see the world much more locally than globally, okay, the way we do. And, I'm beginning to study some visual system things about our parrots. And, we know so little. It's frightening about the world around us. Again, thank you very much.